You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Saw the games, physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched them on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the games. I watched the games.
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joes, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth. Welcome you to episode 3. How were certain rosters constructed for this year and how are they doing? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Recorded on the evening of Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. So, Bob, about last night.
Speaking of the ugly and the bad.
Would you say you feel daunted?
No, maybe faltering a bit. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
Maybe faltering a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, the funny thing, for a whole lifetime, we were promised in song that would never happen.
Never. And shall not. Was it shall not? Yeah. I always say shall not. I mean, or cannot. Yeah. Cannot. We cannot falter.
Yeah.
And, we've been through enough over the years. I remember sitting in the BW3s in Bloomington watching IU lose by 50 at Minnesota when Damon Bailey's senior season. We've talked about the Kentucky game. We've talked about, we talked about the Colorado game that I traveled to. We've talked about a bunch of, and we've had multiple copious experiences where the Hoosiers have been dog walked. And I'm old enough to remember the actual game where Bob Knight threw a chair across the gym floor. At a Purdue game, I might add.
I was watching, yeah.
Yeah. I think the whole state was in those years, and they, and it was a thing. But the one thing I go back to, and this is something that what's kind of special about being an IU fan is it's a community of people, and we don't always agree. Sometimes we're not always nice to each other. As fans back and forth. But when someone from Purdue goes and yells at one of our own, well, we're there with it. Yeah, we're there going, no, not our people. Yeah. And we've been lucky over the years to be parts of multiple IU communities. What we do with the Back Home Network and through Assembly Call and their Substack. Mike and I have spent years on Pigs.com. The work that Jeff Rabjohns does over there. And Trevor Andershock and that crew and the guy himself, Mike Pegram, just really building, kind of rolling the ball. I know you've done some work, inside the hall with Alex Bosich, and there's many others. Some are pay, some aren't. We encourage you to consume as much of it as you can because they are great places to interact with people who may be as rabid or maybe people where you can kind of get a better idea of what's actually going on inside the program and give you a chance to, kind of sound off a little bit in what's usually a fairly safe and moderated environment, and also feel supported from time to time, that you're not alone out there, even though the dog's looking at you weird when you're yelling at the TV.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And speaking of our extended Hoosier community, we should probably send Back Home Network a dual shout out to both the Mothership Pod, the Assembly Call on their 1000th show. They did, I guess it was last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And also our siblings over at Doing the Work for their upcoming 100th episode. So we should definitely give thanks and shout outs to Kathy, Jeff, Jared, Coach, Ryan, and Andy. So Great stuff.
Great stuff.
And we're on episode 3. So, it's just it's crazy to think like how much work. I mean, I now understand and appreciate what goes into that, having actually started to do this stuff ourselves.
There are people who are like, where's Moats been the last month and a half? Well,
Exactly. I was actually doing the math and added up the episode counts from MASH, Seinfeld, and the Honeymooners. And if you added all those together, it would still be less than half of all the episodes of Assembly Call.
That's amazing. That's amazing, and that's and a lot of really high quality content and a lot of good relationships, and we're going to be getting a chance to experience that through this community.
Yeah.
Upcoming in a couple weeks. Exactly.
Yeah, that's our housekeeping note. The back network meetup is upon us. It's like just short of 2 weeks away, I guess. Saturday, February 3rd at the upstairs pub. The game time for the Penn State game, which is before that, is a noon tip, I believe. Yeah, noon. So the assembly call boys will be doing their live post game show up at the upstairs starting. I believe they said they'll give like an hour, I think, gap in there in terms of allowing everyone to walk over from assembly hall to the assembly call show. So I think planned for about 3:00. So yeah, and we will both be there.
We will be there. I mean, I've got a little easier time hopping over than some people, but it'd be good to hang out with Mike here for reliving the old days in Bloomington and our old haunt of downtown around Kirkwood.
Yes, exactly. We will be at a fine cigar shop that we were very familiar with, and it's kind of our usual tradition whenever we get together in Bloomington. So if people do happen to see us downtown, they can certainly stop by and say hello if they're into cigars in the quad area there.
Let us know.
Yep.
And again, there are a couple of people we desperately need to thank. The sound and look of this podcast owes a great deal first to Bob Thompson for our opening and the sounds that you hear that really kind of capture when we first heard them and we worked through them, really captured what we were looking for from the get-go. And then when we saw our and that's Bob Thompson who was responsible for that, and John Ringer of ringdesign.com for designing the logos that you see that are just, again, really just on message and on point, and couldn't be happier and more thankful and grateful to the two of them. And we definitely owe them a beverage or two for what they've done for us in getting this going. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Huge thank you to the two of you for your hard work, for really a lot of us in the network. So Mike, saw that you got a really cool New Year's gift.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. It's, I was very happy. For my Christmas list, I'd politely asked / begged Santa to steal me a copy of that 600-page manifesto written by Connor Stallions, on his detailed plan to seize the reins of leadership within Michigan football. But sadly, the jolly fat man did not come through for me on that one. But I
came through from Michigan another way. So
yes, exactly. Yes,
you didn't need the 600 pages, Connor. You just didn't need them.
Yes, exactly. maybe that was the secret plan somehow. So yeah, but something did come through as far as a gift arriving last week in my mailbox from Home Field Apparel. Our mutual pal, Bo Haynes, aka Nola Hoosier, he sent me this, and I'll lean up a little bit. It is a 1993 Charlie Ward FSU basketball football dual T-shirt, and it is awesome. And I was quite happy to get it. Full disclosure, I was a rabid FSU and Bobby Bowden fan back in my younger days, and yeah, the more from this the delivery pouch that came from Home Field, the shirt brought back all those memories of that era in Seminole football history. The 93 title team with Charlie Ward, as the Heisman quarterback. I guess the 50 points I remember that the Noles hung on Michigan up at the Big House, and all the full bag of Bowden trick plays that made me a devoted follower back in my teen days back in Terre Haute. So
I remember you in the Indiana Memorial Union at the pool tables with a Florida State hat.
Mm-hmm.
That you wore, that you wore. Like I knew Mike. I knew Mike was there. I could just tell from the back because there would be one Seminoles hat that was in that area, and there was Mike. And whenever you go to,
I would be at the pool tables. That's true.
Incredibly good with the stick, I might add. But again, anytime you go to home field, that's the feeling you get. And as you're looking back at those eras of when we were growing up, and also watching the Hoosiers beat Charlie Ward in the NCAA tournament, that was always fun to do because he was one of the last football basketball guys to really play the way that he did. Yeah. But home field really does a great job of capturing those eras for multiple schools throughout the United States. And honestly, it was just I was so tickled for you getting that, because I just remember how much. I remember sitting in Memorial Stadium watching IU play Ball State, and Cam Cameron set up the Florida State throwback play, and then we were doing the tomahawk chop up in the stands.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, because they were throwing it back to Jay Rogers. I mean, that's, and that's the sort of feeling that, when you put a shirt on from home field, that you get. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I guess what, the next holiday thing we just got through with Christmas, so Valentine's is approaching. So maybe if you want to get your special someone a wearable gift that features their favorite college team or alma mater, that is, I would definitely recommend home field. So if you want to give anyone a similar walk down memory lane, I would highly recommend checking out all the great gear they have at homefieldapparel.com. So Bob, let's how about we jump in? So,
high performing roster, a simple yet a very difficult thing to do. And what it really comes down to is the premise of the show. Is it the X's and O's or Jimmy's and the Joes? But so many times over the years when things are going not well in a program, and particularly Indiana, we run ourselves like today. There's a conversation of what's missing, and it kind of goes into this, and we kind of go into this sort of we're big fans of Monty Python and the Life of Brian, where they follow the shoe, and the shoe followers go this way, and follow the gourd, and the gourd followers go this way, and we get in these camps where it's this, or we need that, or the talent, we need more shooting like we've had with Jimmy Rail, or
it's an either or construction.
An either or. We need a Jamal Meeks to bring this all together, and that you catch that sometimes, and that's kind of the false argument, because we know a lot of the fan base is a heck of a lot smarter in how they look at this. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes, there's this thing of, well, why are we so broken? Why are we the island of misfit toys? Mm-hmm. And when you look at the classic Rankin and Bass work of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, it's just, there's this belief that, well, you have these groups, so you have the perfect toys over here that Santa drops off, and then the rest of them are outcasts who are misfits. But in reality, what we found is that Moneyball kind of quotes this too, the idea that there's a whole group of misfits that can come together and create a winning roster. What we find is that's usually more the case, that there's really not a binary sort of good player, bad player, ugly player. There's players that do good things, players that do bad, the player will do bad things, and the player that does ugly things. And so when everyone's, so we all should be singing, we're a bunch of misfits.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think when you and I always talk about this, I think I frequently bring this up, that, in talking about roster construction, the term I'm most apt to use is trade-offs. The hard reality in recruiting is that coaches don't get every feature or skill set they want in a player. Even for the legends, or the high up ranks of the likes of, Jay Wright and Tom Izzo. So you'll often see those coaching interviews where the coaches are asking, what do you want in a player? And usually give some kind of very boring kind of boilerplate answer, well, I want discipline, I want high basketball IQ, athleticism, ball skills, kids that are great teammates. And I always think that, well, who doesn't? What coach doesn't want all of those things? And I mean, I've actually just wished that someday, some coach just comes right on the air and just honestly says, well, personally, I really want a bunch of slow, dumb, undisciplined guys that, try to steal their teammates or friends. Because it's it's just not something that's actually distinguishing yourself in terms of like the decisions you have to make as coach. If you could just go on like Amazon.com and just, find yourself a player that has every single feature that you could possibly want, then obviously there would be no point in actually doing any scouting because it could be just done, at a click. So in a way, the public answers tell you very little, but what coaches actually do behind the scenes is in terms of their choices on who they recruit and who they don't recruit is actually very interesting. So, I mean, they all have some kind of personal notion of the kinds of rosters that they want and have some sense of what their path of success is, going to look like. The more relevant question for coaches, I think, is something like, Coach, what areas of the game do you want to excel at above all others? And what facets are you most willing to sacrifice to achieve that excellence?
And those offer lists tell you a lot. They really do. Oh, yeah. And how the roster's built and how they're deployed tells you a lot also. Tony Bennett and Shaka Smart are rarely ever looking at the same guy. They and a lot of times it's rooted not just in offensive philosophy, it's rooted in defensive philosophy. And I'll grant you that oftentimes coaches will say, well, the kid can shoot. And as Paul Ferguson, the varsity basketball at Columbus North and spent some time up at Wheaton College and Wheaton Academy up in Chicago will tell you, good shooting absolves you of many basketball sins. So they'll look at they'll look at, well, if they can shoot the ball really well and defend the way I want to defend and play the type of game that I want to play, fitting into a system, as well as some of the things that come into play, then you're looking at, you start getting an idea of what a coach's type is. And as we kind of go into the rosters here a little later, you're going to see how those kind of, that you're going to see some differences as well as some similarities, but really some differences as to what that type looks like. But there really aren't too many binary paths. There's not that yes, no, or it's sometimes these good things are good enough that and the bad I can live with enough, and I can get better to being ugly enough to be functional. I can make this kid functional, which is again why you see coaches value experience sometimes over just raw talent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we can take a look at the sample, I think, in which we can demonstrate this, and I'll pull this up and this is again for the folks that are just listening on audio only pod. We'll post the slides that we have in the show notes for people to see if they want to check it out on their own time. But so in this, and this is a little bit of a tease for our upcoming episode 4, when we get fully into the concept of the sweet spot in recruiting. But we'll only give just a small peek here to demonstrate this point specifically for roster construction. Because we're focusing on, I guess, more elite teams in this episode, we'll note the most common trade-off for those banner chasing types of squads in terms of roster construction, which is this talent versus experience trade-off. Owing to the one and done rule, the NBA, coaches at the upper echelons typically have a kind of hard choice to make. Do you focus on those truly gifted top 20 kids that, might leave after 1 year and jump to league, or you take those kids that are that one level lower and who are slightly, let's say, less productive as freshmen, but will stay around longer and actually start to develop into the kind of players that compete for national championships?
So can you tell us a little bit about the measurement you're using, the evaluative tool you're using, box plus minus?
Exactly. BPM? Yeah. I was just about to get to that, but that's a good one. So BPM, box plus minus, it's simply an estimate of a player's total contribution in points above the quote unquote average college basketball player per 100 possessions. That's the standard definition of the term. basically the higher the score, the better the player in this example. So in the average player, I have not seen the actual calculation, but what I understand is that technically the average player in college basketball should be at a 0, and they are measured whether they are contributing more than the midpoint of points above or below that line. So if you're at least above, if you have a BPM of say 2 or 3 or 4, you're at least somewhat above the average basketball player in college basketball. And if you're below in the negative, then you are below that 50-50 line.
And it measures offense and defense with a whole.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay.
They haven't split out. So they're actually like, there's an OBPM and a DPPM. So one for offense and defense. And the one we're looking at is basically the sum of both of those that gives this total BPM score. So, but yeah, basically it's just a relative strength measure for college basketball players. I mean, it's not perfect. There's no perfect measurement score in a lot of the statistical analysis that I do, but I do find that at least this one, it's at least reasonable at measuring the relative performance of players when you compare them against each other. And it is something that's a little bit more advanced than its close cousin, the plus minus score, which for our purposes is not very useful. And frankly, it's more of a hockey statistics than it is for basketball. So. Yeah, so this example I pulled up here. This is the a comparison of the BPM, or basically the performance average for Baylor's 2021 national championship team versus the 4-year one and done average BPM for all the one and done players drafted between 2019 and 2022. So what this chart demonstrates here, and you see like two separate lines on this chart. The one on the top left-hand side is the average for one and done players and their BPM performance. Theirs averages out to 6.15. Typically, if we're thinking about BPMs, 5 is pretty decent to good. If once you get up to like 7, 8, 9, you're starting to get into like really upper echelon players. And then anything above 10, you're starting to get into like all-American candidates.
Superman.
Yeah, exactly. So in this example, one and dones are averaging a 6.15 BPM over that 4-year period. If you look at Baylor, who won the championship in 21, their starter core, their 5 starters, go back, let's say 2 years from when they won the national championship. In this example, let's call it year 1. Their average BPM is 2.82, which is well below that of the one and dones. So you can see that the one and dones early on are the better options. They will come into college and simply outperform most any like underclassmen, typically sophomore and freshman. That is, let's say in the either whether in the sweet spot or even further below. They are the best players by definition. What the advantage that kicks in for the sweet spot players is that they will stay. One and done players are gone. That's why you see in this example, the one and dones are their performance is signified by in year 1, and then there is no continuation. You'll see if you're looking at this slide, there's just a dotted arrow upward indicating NBA development, which signifies that, yes, these players will be getting better, but their improvement will be happening in the NBA, not in college. For Baylor, in this example, once they go from year 1, they pop up to year 2, they're already up at 7.8. So they're already 1.6 above the one and dones from the year prior in that second year. By the time they get to third year, in this example, that's the national championship year, they're at 9.1. Around 9 is typically what you see for like Final Four national championship teams. And so the variance is already up, of like 3.13 in this example.
Some of that kind of helps explain why you'll see, a Kentucky or a Duke with a bunch of guys that, that 6.15 or that are kind of in that 6th level, they may lose a Sweet 16 game or an Elite 8 game because they're going up against tougher competition. They may have players that will eventually be better, but have been in the system a little longer, work better together, and also have more college skill, college level skill, where they're able to counters better. They're able to defend at a higher level. They have a better college body or a better adult body. So you see that. I mean, I think that's one of the explanations as to sometimes why the one and done teams, the heavily stacked one and done teams, haven't just every year you don't see a Duke or a Kentucky or a Memphis at the top of the list.
Of course. Yeah, and it's also just it's just a reality of the performance improvement curve that you see with all college basketball players. Is that if you looked at the performance log for players from their freshmen to sophomore, juniors, and seniors, you see this like nice, sort of like upswinging curve in performance for basically all players. You don't see like cases where kids like start way up, high as freshmen and then like drop down to when they're seniors. That does happen, but generally, if you aggregated all of the performance measures for college basketball players, you'll see like there's just this nice curve that goes upward from their freshman to their senior year. And basically, no matter what teams you look at that make it to let's say the Final Four national championship games, you see the same thing. I'm throwing up this example up here. This is go back. This is Michigan State's 2000. Let's see, that's the 2019 team, which was their last Final Four team, against again the 4-year one and done average. Sparty starts out 2 years before they make the Final Four. Their core is at 3.92. 1 year before the Final Four, they're up to 8.17, and then finally in their payoff year, the Final Four, they're at 9.0. So this is
remember that 9.0 number, guys, because it may come back. There may be a quiz a little later, may come back to be remembered and useful information for you.
Yeah, specifically for that particular team.
Yeah.
And just looking at that's like what I showed you is just the aggregations of players. Like literally the starting 5 for those teams. This is just showing you like an individual player. So this is the box plus minus of Jared Butler from Baylor versus the 2021 NBA one and done class. So in this case, again, and this is pretty typical, you'll see for like sweet spot type players. I mean, I think Butler was like rated about in the 80s, I think it's like literally 88 in his class. He's this is comparing his first year output to some one and done type players: Cade Cunningham, Moses Moody, Scotty Barnes, Jalen Suggs. He starts out basically at the lower echelon of this collective group. He's at like I think 3.8 as a freshman. You see Suggs and Cunningham are all above 8, so they're way above even like the normal one and done average. However, when you get to year 2, Butler's already up past basically all of the players, and he's all of the one and dones except he's basically tied with Jalen Suggs. So he's already essentially eclipsed 90+% of the one and dones just by going to his sophomore year. And by the time he gets to his junior year, he is well above. He's like just a little bit below 12 on his BPM, and so he's at least like he's at least four above, even some of the higher averages on like Cade Cunningham and some of those other guys. So this just shows you at an individual level how this dynamic tends to work out in terms of the performance curve of the sweet spot upper, sort of that second tier, though ready for the NBA, but not ready for the NBA as freshmen group of players versus the players that actually do leave for the NBA as freshmen.
And I mean, there's a huge difference between a 6'2" shooting guard in college and a 6'6" shooting guard shooting the same percentages in college. There's a lot of that where the league is definitely more elite, and you can be a very good, excellent, all-American college basketball player and maybe not play at all in the NBA. or at least play meaningfully in the NBA. So there's a lot, there's a lot of variance in this whole process. But I think it boils down to what we always go back to is the question of, well, what's the only thing that matters? And the question is it working? And so many times we look at, well, good, bad, or ugly. Oftentimes they can be basically the same thing, meaning that there are some bad things that are done that become good things. There are, player attributes we may not like that as freshmen, that by the time they're seniors, man, you really like that kid for your team, and because all of your opponents can't stand him. There is that thing where, where we start looking at the fact that we spend a lot of time on kind of the what's happening as well as how it's impacting a program, but and is that program winning or losing? And then ultimately it goes back to, we as Indiana fans are fairly sensitive to this, the idea that, well, you can fix all of your problems by talent acquisition. And I think what Mike shows in this in so many great ways for me, it's been, but there's a lag to that. And you may be seeing this with certain programs right now where when you're in one of the reasons why you see coaching regressions, because that first group went through and now they're reloading with a whole new group, and they've gone from a team that's performing at 9 on BPM aggregately. Now they're down to a 3, and they may miss the tournament. And they may have aspired to hit a 3 because they may not be there when they first started the season. So, there is a developmental process to all this that we kind of look at. And ultimately, it's as time marches on, is it working? Is the question we have to ask ourselves, and why? Again, you look at college. You look at the impatience. Why it's so stark that if you're in a year 3, a year 4, a year 5, why fan bases, athletic directors, the media start asking some very pointed and difficult questions if things are appearing to be a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. No, and it is hard. And I think there's those exchanges of teams, the outflow of really good players and the inflow of new ones. That's why there is some advantage, obviously, to having those kind of sweet spot sort of kids where you have the talent, but they stay. And that's the key. That's why, the folks like Jay Wright and Tony Bennett, and some of the others that have kind of really adopted this strategy have really benefited and profited from taking that versus the older strategy that we saw Calipari take back in the 2000 teens. So yeah, when we come back, we'll take a look at some of these rosters. We'll take a look at 3 rosters that to fit a reasonably accurate definition of a model roster, and we'll see how they may be a bit different than what we're used to seeing in college basketball. Coming back on X's and Joe's.
So welcome back. Model rosters, and we picked 6 teams that and 3 of them are going to be the model, and 3 are going to be what we call the misfits. And we kind of looked at when Mike and I first talked about this episode. We talked, Mike, again, IU and Philly, the guy knows Villanova pretty well, but the question we came to was, could UConn, are they kind of the heir apparent in so many ways to Villanova? Could they be the last to do it this way? And I think the answer is no, because I think someone else will find ways to kind of do it the way that they're doing it. But in just a few years, Dan Hurley has figured out some things at UConn. And you're looking at a team that's, defending national champions. They're 15-2 and 5-1 in the conference right now. They're in the top 10 AP, Ken Pom, Torvik net. They're 3rd in the country in offensive production, unadjusted. And even though they're 80th in defensive rank, they played some really tough opponents, and especially in a high-scoring Big East, and they're still holding their opponents to under 100 points and 100 possessions. They've been done it without their big man, Donovan Clingan, for a few games. They're really not the same team they were last year. They lost some pretty key pieces. but they shoot the ball extremely well. And you look at, and so again, if you look at this, these team sheets on the audio guys, take a look at these real quick. Just as a word, I did some of these over the weekend. I got the records right, but if you're looking at this a week or two later, some of this they'll be in the ballpark, we think, or not. But it's because these are very fluid statistics. But you start looking at Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer, who are both experienced transfer portal guards. Alex Caraban, they're basically their top three players, their top three options, other than Donovan Clingan, who's their 7-2 post. Those are three guys that the two of them they got for the transfer portal. They recruited Caraban, who is just actually a little outside the sweet spot, right, Mike?
Yeah, he's in terms of I guess the traditional range, he's around 100, I think. So he's kind of right on the event horizon, I guess, of what is typically the sweet spot area. But yeah, when Indiana was recruiting him, there was a time, not to make IU fans even more happy with us. There was a time where I remember Alex Caravan was actually probably leaning towards IU more than any other school. And I remember actually watching some of his games when he was playing up at the NEPSAC, which is the really competitive private school conference up in the Northeast. So I was very much a Caravan fan, and I really hope that IU would luck out in getting him. But like so many other Archie Miller recruitments, it kind of fizzled out a bit.
And again, when you look at the size of this roster, Caravan's at 6'8", but he's definitely a perimeter player more than he is an interior player. You look at the basically you have a bunch of guys 6'2" through 6'8". You have several players that are in the sweet spot, but you also have Stefan Kassel, who's he came in ranked 10th, and he's only getting 24 minutes a game over the course of the season. So it can be where you don't have to keep that superstar stud recruit on the floor 30, 40 minutes a game. That if you have a culture that's built around this, that values player development, which Dan Hurley does, you end up with you can justify that. And a lot of what Hurley, where he impresses me, defensively, they're good at stopping opponents, and they're good at protecting the glass. They're good at cleaning it. They're not, but they're not. It's going to be defined as, say, a Houston defensively, but. Yeah. Offensively, I love how his teams flow in and out of different actions in their sets. Yeah. I compared him with Mike earlier to Golden State, that the ball moves from side to side, it attacks. They can they have multiple scoring options, both on the perimeter and inside. They can attack you driving it. They can attack you passing it into Clingan off of rolls. They're not sticking him with his back to the basket and pumping it down there. They're using him off ball screen action, handoff action, and really just kind of getting, a guy like Cam Spencer. And the great thing is, because the way they run this, the reads they make, all five guys on the court can end up with the basketball at any given time. All five are in a place where it's designed so that they can get the shot that they need off of it. Yeah. And it makes it very hard for a defense to focus on one area and take that away. So you actually have to have a team. And again, if they're playing at their or close to their level, but it also, that type of talent insulates you, that if you're having a bad shooting night, you defend well enough to keep your opponent away, where you're not running into 14-point runs, 8
kill shots throughout the game,
6-minute scoring droughts. Yeah. You're able to, you can get Tristan Newton go into the basket and dumping it off to Clingan for that dunk. You have those, you have that ability, and you have a system that's really well tailored and kids that run it extremely well. So when you look at a team. Go ahead, Mike. I'm just impressed with how they've done things in a short period of time.
Absolutely. And when you talk about culture and obviously geographically, because where I live, I used to work just within like a 3-minute walk from the Villanova Pavilion. UConn is probably, in my mind, the closest thing you have to a modern team that's using that J Wright model. I mean, they're chasing mostly sweet spot kids the way the Wright used to. A lot of like high school kids ranked around 30 to 80, and supplementing with maybe one or two like key transfers. I think right now they have. I looked on their roster the other day. They had 7 kids ranked the top 80 with 2 key transfers. Their 2 recruits lined up for the 24 class are both kids ranked, between 30 and 80. So you could actually take this UConn roster, superimpose it over top of just about any other Villanova roster from the past in the Jay Wright tenure, and you would hardly find or notice a speck of difference between the two. They basically make all their hay on those ranked, but sub-elite recruits that stay past their freshman year and hit the right balance of talent experience, that typically wins in March. And even just, the statistical overlap, not just talking about recruit rankings, but like, what they actually do on the court, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, I always say that they just like kill you with efficiency. They, especially with like field goal percentage. The current Husky squad is number 2 in the country in 2-point field goal efficiency. The 2018 Nova squad that last won the national championship, they were number 2 in 2-point field goal efficiency. Assist, they're both very, both programs were very good in terms of, their system, leading to a lot of shots coming off of, good action and good passes that led right directly to scoring opportunities. So I think you're right. I mean, what we say is that, they have a system, they have enough talent that stays, that is disciplined, and they basically can just keep hitting the reset button year over year in terms of, just like plugging guys in that know how to do this and perform it at a level that gets them pretty deep into March.
And the other thing is you look at how they're using the portal, and that to me is what's fascinating as well, that, when you start looking at how players are playing against higher level, sometimes even against lower level competition. I mean, Tristan Newton, nobody, was not a highly sought after recruit coming out of high school.
No.
Over time, his body developed, his game developed, and oftentimes, and one good thing if you guys spend the $20 on the Ken Palm every year, you can take a look at a kid and say, okay, well, how they do against A and B competition, Tier A and Tier B competition. If you have a kid that's shooting 40% from 3 in a mid major or a low major conference, and then you look at the 4 games they had as bye games, and they were shooting 20% with a 35% turnover rate, that may not be a kid that translates well to division to the high major programs, that are looking to contend. But if you see a kid whose numbers are close or better, now you're talking about a kid that may be very attractive in the transfer portal. It's one reason why a kid like, I think Dalton Connect was so popular, was that you could just and then you throw the game footage in and you're like, okay, we see the setup, we see what he's able to do. Yeah. That kid's a player, and he just flew under the radar screen, or the light bulb clicked off, or he figured some things out. Or sometimes they're 19, 20 years old, they grow. It's not like they stay that, their heights change. So
exactly,
definitely wait. So UConn again, we look at the model roster. The next one we picked, and this is one that when you think about programs that have kind of not adopted the sweet spot, and this isn't really even a sweet spot hit, but they've done some things a little differently this time that John Calipari hasn't done in quite a long time. And Kentucky sitting at 12-3, 2-1 in the SEC. Yeah, they're as always popular with the media and the AP. Their Ken Palm through net is kind of that, has them top 20, but they have a 7th ranked offensive efficiency. Defense, and again, because of the age of the team, can make some sense here. But you look at, in the past, Kentucky has always been kind of one of those teams that didn't really feel like they had to shoot the ball particularly well, because they had enough coverage on the rebounds that they could rebound a third plus of their own misses, and they had the big of the week, the big of the year down there to finish off and to score and mop up on second chance points. They would have
Yeah,
guards.
having Towns and Davis helps.
And you can't teach them to be big, and you can't teach them to be Towns Davis. You can't teach that. You just can't teach those that type of thing. Or even a Trey Lyles when you really think about it, where
Sure.
it's like you're going to be they physically outmatch you at every spot. Duke has some similar things too.
Exactly.
But this is the best and highest volume 3-point shooting team of the Calipari era. And for a guy that still runs a lot of dribble drive action, a guy that still does a lot on pick and roll, we have a kid like Rob Dillingham as a lead guard, Reed Shepherd as a lead guard, and note his Reed Shepherd's BPM is sitting at 14.2 as a freshman, the 43rd ranked kid in the country as a guard,
which is ridiculous. I mean, I just give people a sense like usually like the high BPMs that are like really crazy will oftentimes be like like Zion Williamson. He was like up, I think it was like 1920 or something.
Trace Jackson Davis was 16 last year, with his utilization rate. I mean, Zach Edey's close. I mean, that's so exactly. So this is and so you do have, and again, you still have Aaron Bradshaw there, who dealt with some injuries. You still have those one and dones there, but with Trey Mitchell and Antonio Reeves coming back as transfers, running the that are putting up. I mean, you're kind of putting up one and done numbers.
Yeah,
you have a much different looking Kentucky team. Not only that, but not only are they the best and highest volume 3-point shooting team in the Calipari at UK, they're the fastest playing team that Calipari's had at UK.
Yeah,
and they're not turning it over. They're not turning it over. So they're not their rate of offensive rebound is not what it because it hasn't had to be in the past. Yeah. But you look at how Calipari has kind of looked at looking at his roster construction and going, maybe I need to move away from a bunch of guys who are jumping out of the gym, but now I have some guys who can actually create their own shots, get makes, again, break down defenses and really put defenses into scramble modes. It's creating a better offensive flow for him with players that are, I would say, this is more like your father, or really your grandfather's Kentucky team. Exactly. It's you're seeing Jack Givens and Kyle Macy coming out here. You see more Rex Chapman.
Yeah,
you see a lot more Rex Chapman than you actually do.
Nerlens Noel.
Right, exactly, or the Harrison brothers.
Yeah.
And
the just thinking back on this, from my perspective, it's interesting because the Sweet Spot actually came about. I started doing that research because of Kentucky. It was just doing these sort of side-by-side comparisons of, Kentucky versus Villanova, Kentucky versus, Virginia and all these other teams. And I started seeing this variance and I was like, well, man, look at all these one and done kids that are just, Kentucky just hoovers up all of these top 10 players every year for better part of a decade, but they weren't winning much of anything, especially in March. So, I think what you said is right. I mean, the difference is compared to the past, and I think this is a better approach, is the addition of some of those older, more mature scorers like, Reeves and Mitchell. I think it really is making a huge difference, for Kentucky. I mean, their teams of the past would, like you said, they would get exposed totally by some of those more experienced, teams, in March. Now Cal, we're talking about the trade-off. Most, 90+% of, college basketball programs on that whole curve that we're showing you, they're on the curve where they don't have the talent and just desperately would like to have more. They have more than enough experience. And it's like, okay, we want to move up on the curve where we can actually get, some more of those high-end players on the higher level of the box plus. Cal is actually the one guy is actually going the other direction. He's saying like, look, I'm already maxed out in terms of these, in terms of like recruit rankings of, getting the elite players, one and dones, but they're leaving too fast. And I'm just getting killed in March for having to swap out, freshmen for new freshmen. Let me take in a few guys that actually have some experience that are pretty high skilled transfer guys. Reeves is a really good shooter. Mitchell's kind of been all over the place. He's bounced around, but he's, a very skilled guy. Again,
he's effective.
An IU recruit at one time.
Effective.
Exactly. But right now, like, Kentucky, they just have 4 top 30 players on their roster. Whereas, like 2018, they had, I think, 8 top 30 players, with 7 of their top 8 scorers were freshmen. And that's a team that got bounced by K-State in Sweet 16. So again, it's there just was no more room that Cal could go in terms of just adding more and more talent and trying to just just overwhelm teams like he could with the 2011 team, because there's just only so many Anthony Davises that come along in college basketball. So,
and it's hard to get those guys to play together in a short, okay, here's a summer with limited workouts. Here's your practice, time. You talked about John Calipari, who has an international experience. He's coached the Dominican Republic team and done some work with USA Basketball, particularly as years working with the Dominicans, which kind of taught him how do I get a group of guys to play together for a short period and compete on the international stage. There's an art to that, and it's one. And some people may look at this like, what's he saying? But it's what makes him one of the best coaches in the game today, because he's been able to, over the years, mold together kids who really don't know how, who don't know how to play the game on the collegiate level, get them playing the way that he wants them to play, and getting them performing throughout a season where they're at least competitive in one of the most difficult basketball conferences, top 3 in difficulty, as well as being a perpetual national contender, even though it doesn't always work out the way that they want it to in Lexington.
Yep.
We asked you guys to remember number 9. Well, we're going to go on to Michigan State, because that 9 BPM, and looking right now at what should be, based on Tom Izzo's past performances, that year 3, year 4, where his teams now go from building to contending. And there's a lot that looks very similar and a lot that looks very different about this team. They are currently 10-7 across the board. They are 2-4 in the Big Ten. They're out of the top 25. Last time, I think they got 7 votes. Because of their strength of schedule and the way they've played, they haven't really dropped. You're looking at a 10-7 team that's close in that, in the top 20 in the metrics of the analytic sites of KenPom and Torvik, and they're 26 in the net. But unadjusted efficiency, they're scoring 112 points per 100.6 points per 100 possessions. Defensively, they're at 96.4, very similar, I think to UConn. But you're looking at a program, though, that their experience, they're 28th in KenPom with 65, with almost 2/3 of their minutes continuity, which means guys are in the same spots they were a year ago. They're the 5th rank. They had the 5th highest ranked composite class in 2023. Granted, they've lost Jeremy Fears to a tragic incident, and maybe back at some point. But this is a team that's 1-5 in non-Breslin Center games. And looking at they definitely are, and they've been struggling all year, to the point where Tom Izzo, there's some things clearly not working, and he's even saying this to the media, and he's saying it in public, where he's just like, I'm not sure how to get through to these guys. I'm not sure how to get them to do the things I've needed my teams to do since I've been here since the mid-90s. This is a team that's very dependent on Tyson Walker. They're a 6'1" transfer lead guard.
Yeah, overly dependent.
And I mean, Izzo's always been good at finding diamonds in the rough. Like he will find, he'll find a kid like a Tyson Walker. With the portal, it makes it a little easier for him because he can, kind of see how they play. But he's been the guy that has actually promoted walk-ons, preferred walk-ons, and had them be starters. And they were productive starters. Yeah. And again, runs good stuff. Still very modern. Still, it's not, very, very, still very effective sets. Very effective offensive and defensive philosophy. Yeah. But you look at, Jaden Akins as a wing guard at a 5.6 BPM. You look at AJ Hoggard, who, and again, Akins was 54 ranked. Hoggard was 81 ranked. Malik Hall 61. These are quintessential sweet spot guys, Mike. And we're looking at that 5 to 7 range, or that 5.5 to 6.5 range in BPM.
Yeah.
Where in the past, and we look at the Final Four teams, he's running at that 9 level.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because one thing Tom Izzo has always valued is rebounding. And in particular, holding his opponents to one shot.
Yeah.
And this team, even though it doesn't always show up in the analytics, you'll notice, and Tom even said it point blank. Well, what do the analytics tell you?
Yeah, but I was just about to apologize for both of us for using analytics.
But
about Michigan State.
The analytics actually tell you what Tom was telling you, which is Matty Cisco's pulling down 30% of the defensive rebounds. Carson Cooper is pulling down 20, when he's and they don't really play a lot together. What you're seeing, though, is you're seeing the two of them. The rest of the team is under 15%. And in the past, you saw that rebounding by committee was a thing that Michigan State did extremely well. All 5 guys took responsibility for cleaning the boards.
Precisely.
And you have a team now that, again, they're running decent stuff. They're shooting the ball a heck of a lot better. But just that coming together portion and doing the little things that have made Tom Izzo teams great, they're just not doing it.
Exactly.
And it's not happening, and it's showing up in the record.
Yep. Yeah, if you want to sort of like draw a direct comparison, and it's good that you point out the rebounding. That's the thing that sticks out to me the most is just, like comparing today to the past. The 2000 championship squad, I remember they had a plus 12 rebounding margin, offensive and defensive. The last Final Four squad, the one that we just flashed up earlier on the screen, they had a plus 9 rebounding margin per game advantage. Today, they're all the way down at just a plus 3. And I think on offensive rebounding, they're right at the national average. It's like 0.2 above the national average on offensive rebounding margin. So they just don't quite have like the same kind of, capacity at pulling down rebounds and like you said, limiting second opportunities. And you add on top of that what he said, with Walker, like Walker's numbers match up just fine, let's say, with like Cassius Winston, who is sort of like the lead guard on their 2019 Final Four. He's fine as far as the number one. The problem is that Hall, Hogard, Akins, those guys, like I said, they're between 5 and 7 BPM. The 2019 Final Four team, the second and third guys were more around like 9 to 12. That's I think like Xavier Tillman was 11 or 12. Kenny Goins was around 10. So basically, the current Michigan State's 2, 3, and 4 option guys are actually statistically better aligned to like the 5, 6, 7 guys from the 2019 squad, and that's really where the gap is. They just don't have the firepower like they used to of the Draymond Greens, Gary Harris's, and Mateen Cleaves of the world. They just don't have them in numbers.
But at the same time, it's not those players. Is it a system thing? Is it a development thing? Mm-hmm. At what point do you look at a Hall of Fame coach who, at this point and is clearly pulling out what, his hair and trying to figure out what's actually happening inside of his program and doing streams of consciousness with the media and visibly frustrated that whatever motivation used to work isn't working anymore, which comes into, what a lot of times coaches talk about. It's not always just, boy, let me show you what I'm running. No, I can watch your video. I know what you're running. It's how do you get through to an ever evolving group of kids who are at sometimes, basketball, they've been good at it and they enjoy playing it, but that may not be their, they may see it as being a way to make some money when they get out of college.
Yeah.
But they're not as hungry as maybe other players that you've coached in the past, and how and you've recruited them because you think you can unlock something. You've recruited them, you've brought them to your campus because you think you can bring them together to play. But now it's like, how do you kind of get through to them, and how do you move them in such a way? And I think as we go through the next 3, we're going to kind of get a better idea of one program that's having a similar problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a little different because they're younger, aggregately, but you've got some programs that how does that sort how is your practice of coaching? How is that? What are you doing differently? And it may not just be what's on the whiteboard. Oftentimes it isn't. How are you approaching situations and working through situations and getting the buy-in you need to be successful?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I'm always looking at the numbers, and I think all those intangible things that you talk about show up in the numbers. I mean, they're related, but the numbers are almost just maybe like existing as a secondhand measure of those problems that are confronted on the team that really can't be measured at that time.
Your system is 5 guys on the floor rebound, and you have 1 guy doing it, and that's a problem. And it's a big one. It's a big one.
Yep. Yeah. So for that segment, we will move on to the next one. So after the break, we'll take a look at some of the island of misfit toys and probably see some familiar names and faces in this coming segment. So stay tuned on X's and Joe's. All right. Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth with my co-host, Bob Moats. Now we're going to talk about misfit rosters. What are they trying to do and how are they doing it? So, Bob, this is the fun part because we can actually jump into some familiar faces.
Before we jump into the familiar faces and names, can you give me kind of an idea of what the misfit toys in your world, what when you think of the island of misfit toys, what are you seeing?
Oh, you're thinking, I love Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and that was still, I don't know, one of my favorite like childhood must-see Christmas viewing during the holidays. But I always found it weird that in the Rudolph universe that there was I guess you might say like a functioning Soviet-style gulag archipelago for undesired toys. I mean, we talked about this, but yeah, I mean, it's just like, I mean, to this day, I still can't get over that. I mean, if you think about it, like the land of misfit toys checks off all the same boxes as the Solovetsky gulag. It's a barren, frozen island where you're sent against your will. You can't get out, and they only let you out when they need you again. So, I still wonder, do you think that the show writers, when they were filming that cartoon, were possibly reading Solzhenitsyn during filming?
You never really know what someone's doing at any given time, but it was set close to Siberia. I'll give it that much.
Yeah,
I will give it that much.
Yeah, I was wondering, maybe that's where they send Herbie if he doesn't make his productivity quota at the workshop.
Time to go to Siberia.
Yeah,
you to the salt mines.
Yeah, the Santa's NKVD knocks on those doors like. So you would have been a dentist and not a glorious labor for the proletariat. Anyway, yeah, that's a nice little side one, yeah.
Yeah. So while Mike was talking about was talking about the Siberian links to Rudolph, I realized I made a mistake, a typo. Purdue is actually 5-2 in conference. And no, I was not wishful thinking. I think I was in my anger last night typing out the fact that I may have gotten Purdue and IU confused. So Purdue is 5-2 in the Big Ten, pretty much tied for they're right around. Well, Wisconsin is 5-1, Purdue's 5-2. So they are pretty much at the top of the Big Ten, 16-2 overall. AP number 1. In the metrics, they're 2-3. They are statistically one of the best teams in the country and have been for the last 2 years. Offensively, top 10 offense, 118.7 points per 100 possessions. Defensively, 97.1. So they are holding their opponents to pretty much less than 1 point per possession, as we saw last night. But there's some interesting things that even though their minutes continuity is top 10 in Division One, so a lot of the same faces you saw last year in Boilermaker uniforms are the same faces you see this year on the floor. There are some notable exceptions to that. They are actually letting the other team's offenses play a little faster by about an entire second. At 16.6, it's second fastest than any other, a full second faster than any other Purdue team.
Yeah.
So they're not exactly, again, sometimes teams really want to slow you down and force you to do certain things. This Purdue team they'll let you because I think they know they can outscore you, and that's kind of the mindset that they're having to it. And if they force you to take a quick shot, they may give up a few possessions, but they're also going to find ways to get out and transition a little bit and score some points that way.
Yeah.
They get fouled a lot. And Zach Edey in particular gets fouled a lot.
And
I
do think he gets fouled a lot. Yeah.
And we know that. Every 100 field goals he takes, he shoots 85 free throws. Sixth best in Division One, and crazy. No one's getting hit as much as he is because basically because teams are also sometimes throwing 2 or 3 bodies at him, and as you saw, like with Gabe Cupps, you have physically having to wrap him or trying to find ways of keeping him off the boards. It's hard to do. And as a result, you have a kid, National Player of the Year numbers at 15.6 BPM. The improvement that Braden Smith has gone over, he's even playing a little more per game at almost at 9.6. His contributions have been there. I think the big one for them is the element they were missing last year that they had the year before that, and periodically Painter has had this, is that driving guard. And Lance Jones, who they brought in as a transfer, we knew is a pretty good player. He has a very good jump shot, but he's also he's very good at just breaking, straight line driving and forces defenses to play that in addition to playing him as a shooter. Yeah. So it's really hard to double team Edey because he is surrounded by shooters. Unlike years where I think they've been a lot where their sets were really dependent, like when they had Klein and Carson Edwards, and you were seeing Jordan Sperber doing great work talking about particularly what they were doing out of zoom action with Travion, going through a Travion Williams or a Isaac Haas. What you're seeing now is you're seeing a Purdue team that they can get the ball into Edey. They can also drive it with a Braden Smith or Lance Jones. Smith is very efficient. Tony Adranja did a wonderful job showing that. If you have a chance to watch his film room on Purdue,
great stuff.
It's great stuff where he's able to make level 1, level 2, level 3 reads. But you're seeing a team that's really kind of come together, and they've done it with Caleb First playing significantly fewer minutes. They've done it by putting Ethan Morton more on the bench. They're playing Cam Heide, a 135 wing forward, instead of Miles Colvin, who was top 50?
Yeah, he was, depending on service. He's a top 80 player,
They brought Trey Kaufman-Renn and kind of put him in his natural, more interior type position where he can step out and maybe shoot threes. Mason Gillis is still doing Mason Gillis things, and it feels like that kid's been there since Brian Cardinal was there. But what you're seeing with Purdue is you're seeing a team that's continuously, and where Painter, he knows what he has. He puts the guys in the right spots. Will they be successful in March? I don't know. They're shooting the ball from 3 better than they've shot the last, I think, couple of years.
Yeah, they're much better now.
Makes them a lot more dangerous. But they're also not a team where you've got really a whole lot of creation on this roster. When you looked at the other 3, you had a lot of, you have multiple guys who can create their own shot, or when a play's going bad, and as teams start figuring out, like when you're running into teams in November and December, they're not always on the same page on how whatever it's supposed to do in certain ball screen coverages or handoff coverages. They're not sure how are they going to switch possessions? Are they going to stay? Are they going to help and recover? How does that help and recover look? What angles are they taking? By March, those teams that are sitting in the NCAA tournament, they figured that out. Mm-hmm. And a team like Purdue, who is more reliant on, even though they may not be a set reliant, but they're reliant on read and react ball moving to the right locations, or on those sets actually providing what they need to provide. And they may not be able to turn the corner as effectively. And they may also see that maybe Zach Edey on that screen is holding, maybe he's holding a player.
Yeah. It's like
the whistle
March is almost like
a little tighter. It's a little tighter.
Yeah, no, I would say March is almost like a different sport compared to the rest of the regular season in college basketball. I mean, particularly for like the Big Ten versus the NCAA tournament. And yeah, I think absolutely. If you're a Purdue fan, the number one thing that you would probably be happy about is Braden Smith is really becoming more like a regular lead quarterback style lead guard that you could see going a little bit deeper in March. Last year they were just so dependent upon Edey just sucking in defensive attention and just kicking out, rather than now. Smith is really doing just so much better with stuff off of, ball screen action with Edey, rolling, parallel with him, and then just playing essentially like a triple option quarterback. Is the big going to come after me? Do I lob it to Edey if he commits, or do I kick it out if the tag man, gets out of position? Like I said, Tony really, Adranya ran some really good film room on that.
Braden Smith, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought my thought on Braden is this: when I see this kid play, I see a guy. Remember Greg Maddux when he was pitching?
Yes.
It was a sight to behold, because he was the ultimate pinpoint control pitcher, and he knew how to call. He could pitch almost a perfect game. He was brilliant, and he didn't have a blow by fastball. We're not talking. We're not talking Nolan Ryan at 102 mile an hour here, but Smith has enough wiggle, which means shifting, that ability to kind of quickly change directions on a move, where he can just be evasive to a defender, but he has enough shiftiness where he knows when to use his bursts of speed and when not to, that he's able to get in those areas. So I know that Smith is one of those players. It's kind of interesting to watch, and I mean we can kind of see that he's moved. That he's moved and elevated his game. There's still definite weaknesses on this team. It's going to be interesting to see how they get exploited. So it'd be interesting to see if their February is the same as it was last year.
Yeah. But exactly. No, I think the last thing I'll say about Purdue, I think they, everyone makes a kind of a comparison to the UVA team from 2019 as a kind of, parallel of a systems-based team that really does look like they have sort of the numbers and metrics and firepower to actually win a national championship. I think that's definitely true. I would say that the one thing that I'm still wondering about Purdue, because I think they really do check a lot of the boxes. I do wonder about the fact that, compared to, let's say, that UVA team, that team had 6 NBA guys on it. I mean, they were a system team, but they were a system team with a lot of individual talent. And teams that have one guy that has a huge BPM variance between himself and everyone else, those teams don't always fare typically as well as ones that are a little bit more evenly distributed in terms of performance. So that's the one thing I would say that, is gives me a little bit of pause about Purdue in terms of, how they match up with a lot of recent national championship teams.
And if they get really in a track meet, can they stand? Because watching the first 10 minutes of the second half last night against Indiana almost got themselves back into that basketball game in relatively short order. Exactly. So as we look at the next one, it's Houston. When you talk about great offensive teams, then we look at a great defensive team, and Houston's big question with Kelvin Sampson is really what's it going to look like going into the Big 12. They're 14-2 overall, but both of their losses have been in conference. The metrics love them because their defense is so good, and they do a pretty good job of shooting the ball. their offensive rating isn't bad. Defensively, they're really good. But what's interesting about Houston is, unlike a lot of teams who are really good defensively, they're more willing to give up an assist, because what they're going to do is they're going to lock down on their man. They don't really switch. They fight through every screen. They help and recover quick. And they're there when the pass hits, they're there. And they may give up an assist here or there. They may give up on a cut. But they're not going to give you those easy drives. They're not going to overhelp to that point. And they also play at a tempo where they're very selective in when they run, and they also slow their opponents down. But to me, the interesting thing about Houston is, as effective they are at deflections and blocks and they're an inch smaller than the D1 average. Yeah. This is not exactly, you don't have a 7'1" rim protector sitting in the middle of the lane swatting balls out.
Yeah.
And if you see this, whether it's here or if you see it on the see it on the website or the show notes, Kelvin Sampson's never really been big on, I need to go get sweet spot guys. I need to get guys who are going to fit in my defensive system, play hard for me, and that I can get through to. Yeah. And he has had some better talent over the years, don't get me wrong, and talent has gone on to the league, but it's very much that, he's not again, he's maybe even looking a little lower in his talent, and he's still getting incredible results with three guys that are well over 10 on the BPM.
Exactly. Yeah, when I always talk about Kelvin Sampson, and specifically like his time in Houston, it's hard just because I'm a metrics guy and I'm always looking at numbers. And with him, you almost have to look at not the numbers, but sort of the descriptions of his players to get like a better sense of exactly what he's trying to do and what he's shooting for. So his recruiting bios for his players, they tend to have a lot less mentions of things like skill. Hear a lot about, his players shooting or their ball handling and things like that. It's far more about variables like physique and, ability to play like high contact style of basketball. Before the show, I actually printed up some of the descriptions of his players when they're coming out of high school or, coming out of the portal. And you'll notice that almost every one of the players has some mention about their physique or something about their physicality. And you obviously see that, in his style of play. I mean, just reading through here, just going down the list, physical specimen with a cut-up frame and broad shoulders, rock-solid frame, impressing with his physical play and athleticism, powerful contact player. Stocky frame allows him to use his lower center of gravity to his advantage. He often bullies ball handlers. Big-bodied. Physically, he's long, strong, and holds position well. So you see, just going down the list, all of these players can't really be described accurately by the number that they get. Kelvin is one of those coaches that's just a little bit different in terms of the analytics, because he really is going after a type. And it's not just at one position. He's going at basically every single position. He's kind of looking for that player. He might throw in one guy on the team that can maybe do a little bit more, shot creation or offensively gifted and maybe with a little bit of trade-off in terms of physicality. But as a core team, he is basically trying to rebuild the 1985 Chicago Bears defense for the hardwood. He's really, and you see with the numbers that they're producing this year on the defensive end, they are possibly going to be breaking some records in terms of their metrics.
And I mean, they're not running anything complex offensively, but there's definitely a philosophy of share the ball and play, play as a unit. Both, it's almost like individually he stresses individually do what you got to do defensively in a group. That's where your creation is. We're going to let you create defensively, create turnovers. They're first in steals, they're first in blocks. We're gonna let you play that. But offensively, we're gonna share the ball. We're gonna find the best available shot. In fact, you'll watch a Houston team sometimes play, and you're like, why are they passing so much?
Yeah.
And it's because there's an incredible discipline offensively that he's instilled in these guys to be like, and he's built that in his culture, that we're in this together. And it's and really, when Kelvin says it's us against the world, and we know this as IU fans, he means it. It's like that there's a mindset there that he instills in his teams that we're gonna stand against it all. So
we wanted to show. Last thing I'll say about Houston, they're great, defensively, and the one kryptonite they kind of have is that, and you see this in their tournament results, they always seem to run into a team that has exactly their level of athlete, but also has an athletic, that has offensive skill to go along with the athleticism. They've lost to Miami last year. They lost to Villanova, Baylor, Kentucky, Michigan. They're basically losing to those sort of higher end teams that do have those like 6'8", 6'7" athletes with skill who can basically just score a little bit more than them, in March. So,
yeah. So we're going to bring up Indiana.
We have to.
We have to. 12-6, 4-2 in conference, as and Jared put out a great piece today about the importance of Ken Pom and Torvik, but really looking at the analytics sites, you're looking at a team that's just out of the top quartile of performance. Yes, we use the unadjusted offense to show you just how much the efficiencies actually, or the adjustments help you optically. And you look at their offensive rating versus their defensive rating, giving up over a point per possession. And yes, there were games like Army and Florida Gulf Coast that definitely impacted that defensive rating. And the offensive rating, where you've seen other games like, you'll have games where you score 50 in the Big Ten, but you've had games where Indiana University has definitely underperformed from a statistical standpoint, and that explains those metrics. This is a team that really is built and predicated on getting to the line. They're also built and predicated on attacking the paint and getting their points inside. You are seeing more volume of 3-point shooting and more accurate 3-point shooting. They do share the ball well. They get assists, and you have players, especially your bigs, who are good passers for college basketball. So this team does really well on the assists, but they've been outscored by opponents 180, they've outscored their opponent by 108 points, but they've outscored 61 points from three.
Yeah.
And you're hearing a running theme here that it's like this team has got to hit outside for them to continue. We saw a little bit of this last night with some of the lane packing. You look at last night and you look at the BPMs. And last night, their two best, most efficient players in Khalil Ware and Malik Renew, 7.5 BPM, 5.2 BPM. They're the ones who are at that, close to that one and done level. Actually, both of them are close. They pretty much bracket what you would call a sophomore needing to be, and they're both sophomores. They were, Zach Edey scored 3 times the points they did, so they were taken out of the game. I can argue Indiana is they're feeding the post less, and that was true last night also. Purdue put the ball in the post three times more than Indiana did. But you look at BPMs in the negatives. You look at and that's 3 of the players up here that are playing significant over 10 minutes a game have a negative BPM. Xavier Johnson, we're not going to but it's coming back from injury. His numbers aren't what they were a year ago, neither or 2 years ago, nor is Trey Galloway's from a year ago. So what you're dealing with is a team that, can this get better? Yes. But one thing I think Mike Woodson, we talk about types, and I'm beginning to note, I think that in year 3, and we look at the recruiting profile coming in, this is a guy that likes length. And I think he likes size.
Yeah.
And I think he can, and again, I think he likes size that can drive, because you're seeing Renew driving more. You're definitely seeing Mikazi Mbako driving more. He's got Anthony Walker, who was mostly a guy who scored off cuts at Miami, who's now doing more straight line driving. He's trying to do it with Caleb Banks. But he's not, we're not really seeing a whole lot of what you would call wiggle and shiftiness in guards.
Yeah.
And you look at so if he has a choice between a 6'5" guy that can just be a power back and a 6'2" guy, think about, Walker at Michigan State, which one would he prefer? I think he's going to take the 6'5" guy.
Probably.
And that's, I think a lot of that's just because I think he sees that. And again, they do run quick offensive actions. They have in the 3 years that he's here. They're not running anything intricate. It's not like Tom Crean where, and where you saw whole different types of movement patterns. I always used to joke, the defense was confused, but so was the offense. So, eventually a shot went up. The stuff was brilliant, but it wasn't always clear. But I'd also throw out that, or Archie Miller, where it was just so tight that you just saw guys at times. It was like, well, we have to make this pass because that's what it says on the board. You felt like it was more mechanical. I don't feel like this is mechanical, but I do feel at times it's indecisive. And I would also throw out that age does matter here, because you're dealing with bigs that, as you're looking at, and again, you saw the performance curve. Mackenzie Mbako is probably at the low end of what a one and done or where he should be from a ranking standpoint.
Yeah.
Is that BPM improving? Yes. Can he get himself? And again, remember, these are fluid figures. So you could see him in that 6 range, I think, by the end of the season, right, Mike? I mean, can you see that improvement in half a season?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible because, again, it's an aggregated score. So, he's got to hit more, but he's definitely, I think some of his early play may have, put him in a little bit of a hole in terms of his numbers, but he's definitely starting to become much more of a threat consistently game to game.
But, there's a reason why this team, even though they're at 12-6, even though they're, I'm sorry, 4-3 in the conference, another typo. Boy, I was really not happy last night when I was redoing the records. I'm like,
don't worry, we'll fix it in
you. We're going to fix it. So
I will, I will take the blame for that. So.
Oh man, no, I mean, it was
us and some of our friends. Yeah.
My kid just learned how to yell at a television after that game. So, I mean,
that's funny.
We're seeing this, we're seeing a program that is in year 3 under Mike Woodson, might be more regressive when you start thinking about Archie Miller and his tenure and you throw the COVID year into it. And all that being said, none of it matters, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, that was our last episode, basically. We went in depth on the chip stack and such.
And none of that. And the point is, in the era of the portal, when you're seeing what UConn's done, when you see what Kentucky has done, and how they've shifted, when the question's going to be, can IU make the turn that they've made in the first 2 years under Woodson? And I think, you can have always a reasonable level of optimism as a fan that that's going to happen. I also think, though, that it's going to be very interesting to watch the machinations with Liam McNeely coming in and nothing else. We'll see if Derek Queen comes. It's still pretty much right on the bubble. We're not really sure where that's going to go. But looking at, will there be with Xavier Johnson leaving after 6 years and Anthony Walker as a 5th year leaving, what's coming next? And hopefully, I mean, I think Kalel Ware will be in the NBA next year. So you're going to have some roster spots that you're looking at. Where are the upgrades and can they get that player that we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think,
that they need.
Obviously, within the Discords and other message boards, perusing those last night was, quite a joy. If you don't like Indiana basketball, it would be really fun to watch those. But I would say that, my take on it is that I think some of this is explainable. There's not one problem here. It's maybe, a host of problems that have maybe a few centralizing features in terms of, commonality. I do think that, from my perspective, obviously you kind of talked about sort of like, the coaching perspective. Woodson's, he has about an 8% hit rate on his top 80 guard offers. That's reasonably below what his hit rate has been on the front court so far in his tenure. So he's definitely had a decent a number of hits on really upper end forwards and centers. If he were able to match in the backcourt what he's doing in the front court, I don't think we'd be having I don't think we'd completely eliminate these conversations. I think it would greatly increase a lot of the issues. And it's not even from a talent perspective per se. I mean, obviously talent is a big part of it. I think one thing fans really don't realize is that, when you whiff on players too much, it's not just that you're losing, a player that's like ranked 20 and you have to take a kid that's maybe ranked, 130 and all the BPM, and performance differentials that come with that. I think also just as important is that you may be making a sacrifice on the type of player that you want, not talent, but type. And if Mike Woodson really is insistent on having a very specific type, a kind of like you said, a long guard that I would say that honestly, he likes more independently operating guards. I don't think he wants to really draw. I mean, he's great at drawing up ATOs and like scripted sets, coming out of either timeouts or out of the end of the half. Mm-hmm. I think he really wants more, like you said, like free flowing and sort of like on the go guards that can make decisions and make actions happen independently by themselves within the normal like game action of, ball screens and things like that. So I think if he had with his type of guards, I think we would probably see the offense open up a lot compared to where it is right now. So he's a little bit trapped, I think, in somewhat the same box that Archie Miller found himself trapped in. He couldn't, he had some really good forwards. He couldn't quite get exactly the right kind of guards that could sort of like balance the offense out. And so he is in a bind trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I actually operate within these constraints? And so yeah, like you said, we have to see if it's going to change, but I'm probably long-term not quite as down as some other people are in terms of like the potential, but I do think that he's really kind of with roster construction recruiting has put himself in a little bit more of a hole than he probably expected. He's really struggling to figure out how to get out of it.
And again, I think, you kind of hit the nail on this too, where it's like you're looking for specific types, and I never want to use the word in the portal era of settling on a player. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a inherent danger when you start talking about high school recruiting, and especially when you're talking about guards, because when we looked at our model rosters, all three of them are using transfers in very unique and real ways. Yeah. And really are basing, UConn, again, a lot of their production is coming out of transfers. So there is hope there. It's just the question, I think, for Big Ten programs in particular, and this is where, again, this is not a knock on Purdue. It's not a knock on Wisconsin. But you're not looking at guys who are coming in and shooting the ball, or I'm sorry, that are the same guards that are going to Auburn or Alabama or those SEC or Big 12 guards. Mm-hmm. And that so the reputation of a league, and we're going to talk about that at some point too, kind of matters a little bit too. The question is, can this coaching staff figure out how to make that turn as well?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Get into that area. So, we'll see.
Yep, exactly. Yep. So, when we'll return, we'll try to put what happened in the first half of the season or any season into perspective. Next on the X's and Joe's podcast. And welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by my co-host Bob Moats. Bob, in our last segment, national championships.
Or a conference title.
Conference title, yeah, exactly.
Getting a tournament.
Hanging some kind of banner somewhere.
And for some programs, it is a tournament berth, but it's how we spend a lot of time, and I mean, again, Jared brought up a great point. He just had a Substack article in the community that talks about what stinks about the analytics is that game 1 counts the same as game 31.
Mm-hmm.
It just does, and so those are the facts, and it doesn't. They don't build in an improvement factor. They don't build in the win factor as much. But the thing that kind of stinks, I think a lot, and this is going to be interesting for the Big Ten this year. We're going to see some interesting things happening, I think, in the tournament selection committee. Mm-hmm. There's been criticism in the past about how many Big Ten teams get in. And if there's going to be a year where they look at the Big Ten and say, maybe not. Maybe this is a year where there's 3-4 Big Ten teams that we can actually take. Because as you look at it, and I do use the term stinking pile of average to describe the Big Ten.
It's one of my favorite terms that you use, by the way. I really like that one.
And you just look at a Big Ten game and you look at, when you see Texas A&M playing Kentucky and in College Station, and you flip over to a Big Ten game, and it's like the game it's like I'm watching in slow motion. Mm-hmm. There is a difference, and I think it's something that it's been over 20 years since the Big Ten has won a national championship. There have been plenty of national runners-ups, but at the end of the day, where do you need to be at the end? It's as the season progresses, you become less system dependent. Yeah. And it's why I think Micah Shrewsbury had a lot of luck at Penn State last year in the Big Ten tournament versus other better teams. I think it's why you saw other programs kind of jump up and eclipse, because you have to have the talent levels and you have to have the philosophy behind it to actually go beyond your sets, go beyond how your offense is functioning. And innovation, you're not going to do anything innovative because at this point everyone's seen everything and they know how to defend.
Your scout is out, so yeah.
And everybody else is scouts. So if you try somebody, and the other thing is, you're not going to walk in after playing 34 games with a team and say, okay, whatever we've been doing that got us to this point as a 1 seed, we're going to scrap because we're going to confuse our enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And there have been examples of coaches that have walked in at halftime down 10 and say, okay, we've never tried this defense before. Coach, we're in a regional final. We're in a regional final. Yeah. We're going to do this. And we've never practiced it. You don't even know what you're doing with it. Just confuse if they're confused and you're confused and everyone's confused, maybe we have a chance. I mean, there are stories of that happening in locker rooms. Yeah. There was a time where I remember seeing Butler, where it's like when I saw Butler running a half-court trap against UConn in a national championship game, going, man, they're throwing in the kitchen sink here. They've clearly done it, but they've never shown it in a game. Yeah, or hearing Shaka Smartstaff talk at VCU about pinning guys to the baseline versus going up. There were times where you were where you start noticing those adjustments. Yeah. So getting to that level of privilege where you could actually start having that conversation of that adjustment, or sometime, you're not going to get there in November and December, but you can definitely blow yourself up. I think Juwan Howard's finding that at Michigan.
Oh yeah.
It's possible Tom Izzo may be finding that at Michigan State. Yeah. It's possible Mike Woodson's finding it at Indiana, where in all of these cases, I think Eric Musselman is finding it at Arkansas. There are multiple fan bases that are going, okay, we were supposed to be better. I think Nate Oates would have that conversation. I mean, I'm going down the list of guys where the win-loss record hasn't really reflected what was not just fan expect, but roster expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's funny that it's interesting because it's something I've always told you before. I mean, it's within March, and it's also throughout the year is this idea that the regular season is like, one unit and March is a different unit. And a lot of how the functionality of the games goes is just completely different. It's why, you can see a team like, we're just talking about Purdue, like Fairleigh Dickinson, how they can have almost, it felt like Edey had almost like a 2-foot advantage on their center. in terms of size. I know it's only like 8 inches, which is, still pretty crazy. But yeah, I remember being around some Purdue friends like, oh, how's Fairleigh Dickinson going to manage? I mean, he's just going to right over top of them. And yeah, you get into the game and you see a team from the East Coast that are just scrapping the ball like crazy. I mean, as soon as Edie catches it, there's hands trying to pull the ball away from him immediately, which is not something that happened with the same frequency in January and February. So it's something that I've always said that there are dozens of ways to win 20 games for a program. There are very few ways to win 30 games. And so you're talking about, sort of that wide versus narrow alley of strategic choices in building rosters, is that to be like a really elite national competitor, that lane is very narrow. It's very hard because you have let's say just a certain number of kids you can get. You can get the Sweet Spot kids, and how many Sweet Spot kids are there a year if you just really narrowed it down to just the 3380 kids and maybe 2 or 3 dozen portals. You're not talking about a lot of people. That's just a small percentage of the total number of recruits that are in any given cycle in any given year. So a lot of, I think, what happens is that these teams find themselves overcommitted to a style that just doesn't quite fit with March. But they kind of have to do that because that's how they function from October, November, December, January, and February. And there's so much just in terms of the hedging of risk that you have to think about. The teams that really do succeed in March are the ones that don't necessarily have one Bill Walton or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar scoring 40 points. The teams that you see winning now are teams that have, say, 4 or 5 guys that can step up and score maybe 12, 14, 16 points in a given night if some of their other teammates are having an off night. And if you look at any game log of any decent player, good player, even elite player, about every 3 or 4 games, player's going to have an off night. Mm-hmm. If you have 5 or 6 high-end performers, you're much able to hedge that risk better than if you only have 2 or 3. And that's a big divider that you see between the teams that do win championships and those that get close, but just not quite. So come in March, remember that, folks. Check out the team logs for BPMs and look at those ones that have not necessarily one at 17 and a bunch are at 6, 7, 8. Look for the ones that have a lot of 9s and 8s and 10s, and more likely than not, you find one of those teams is probably going to be the one that wins it.
And so that's a good way to win your office pool or to make your family feel bad about themselves, which we are all about on X's and Joes.
Exactly.
And so Mike, again, thanks for doing this again. We had a great time going through this one. As painful as it was still fun.
Absolutely.
And hope you had a good time too. Yeah. Mike and I will be back in a couple of weeks where we're going to get into where his rubber really met the road and the conversation really took off in the last I would say 10, maybe 15 years, in this idea of the sweet spot. Yeah. And how the sweet spot was born and how it's evolving. So we'll look forward to you tuning in again. And thanks for doing. Thanks for being here.
Yep. So this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and BackHomeNetwork.com. Until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
I'm Bob Moats.
Have a good one, everybody.